As the U.S. government continues stepping up its war efforts in Afghanistan, also increasing is the number of U.S. soldiers refusing to deploy to war. Joining me now to talk more about this topic is Dar Jamal. He is the author of The Will to Resist. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Your book, The Will to Resist, shines a bright light on a growing movement of U.S. soldiers refusing to redeploy to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Why are these U.S. soldiers willing to go AWOL, willing to face prison terms?
Well, there's a myriad of reasons why people are refusing, anywhere from on one end of the spectrum, just being afraid or being lazy, to really the other end of the spectrum that we're seeing is people who are starting to realize more and more that like Iraq, Afghanistan actually is also in violation of international law and the U.S. Constitution by default. Because one thing that's starting to happen is more and more troops are realizing that given that they joined the military, swearing an oath to defend and support the Constitution of the United States, that part of that oath says to do that they have to follow lawful orders. And so by definition, the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, since it happened without UN Security Council ratification, and the fact that this is not an act of self-defense, it wasn't the nation of Afghanistan that attacked the United States. So a soldier, by definition, who follows a direct order to deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan is actually violating his own uniform code of military justice that says to follow lawful orders. So more and more soldiers are learning this, that it's, and therefore it's their duty to resist.
Was it that you found that it was once the soldiers went over to Iraq and Afghanistan, they said to themselves, we are occupying this country? What made them change their mind?
Yeah, most common, that's what happens, is that people deploy either to Iraq or to Afghanistan, and once they get over there, I've heard soldiers tell me things. Actually, a fellow I just talked with a couple of weeks ago who said, I got over there and I believed that we were going to liberate people and to help, etc. And then after seeing what we were doing in Iraq, home raids and these massive military operations and killing civilians all over the place, he said, I realized that I was the terrorist. And that's been really, really common, coupled with soldiers going over and realizing, while seeing people blown up in front of them and killing civilians and all of this, and just realizing this is just wrong. This is not what I signed up to join the military for, and I need to start trying to figure out a way to get out.
What are the rough numbers? How many U.S. soldiers are we talking about?
It's really hard to estimate exactly, but Pentagon figures show that of soldiers going absent without leave, which is probably the biggest category of the way people choose to resist, we're averaging between 4,000 and 10,000 soldiers going AWOL every single year. In the Army, between 2006 and 2007, we saw a 42% increase of the number of troops going AWOL. So it varies on the given year, but right now we're looking at a rough estimate of about 7,500 people going absent without leave every year, and right now that's increasing, corresponding with the massive surge in Afghanistan.
What kind of punishment do these U.S. soldiers face?
Well, when a soldier decides to go to refuse a direct order to deploy, because that's what it is, they do this knowing there's going to be severe punishment. That, you know, disobeying any direct order in the military, you know that if you don't back down rather quickly, you're going to get court-martialed and probably going to do at least some jail time, probably have a rank demotion, this sort of thing. But something as big as actually refusing to go to Afghanistan, for example, right now, a soldier goes into this knowing that they will be court-martialed, which means they'll have a military trial, which basically means you're pretty much guaranteed to get convicted. Over 90% of court-martials end in a conviction. And it means, on average now, that they're going to be looking at about a year in a military brig. They're going to have their rank reduced severely, if not all the way back down to private, and they're going to forfeit the majority of their pay for that year, and then they're probably going to get a dishonorable discharge, which means that they will not have any benefits, no GI Bill, no VA care, any of that kind of thing.
You recently wrote about Sergeant Travis Bishop, an Army soldier who was court-martialed, sentenced to 1 year in prison after refusing to take part in the war in Afghanistan. Can you explain what happened with Mr. Bishop?
He was an individual who served a tour in Iraq for about 13 months, and then he came back and he realized, because of his religious beliefs, that he realized that he because of those, was actually morally opposed to all war, not just Afghanistan, not just Iraq, but all war. And so he decided to file for conscientious objector status. But given that his unit was about to deploy very, very soon to Afghanistan, in order to prepare himself to get the forms filled out and do what he needed to do to prepare to file for CO status, he went absent without leave for a week. And so he ultimately was sentenced to a year in the brig. He had his rank reduced from sergeant to private and forfeiting 2/3 of his pay while he's in the brig, and then he would be getting a quite severe discharge as soon as he got out. So he obviously is paying a very high price for his stand, but as he told me when we talked right before he was literally marched out to the van in shackles, he said, well, I'm scared. This is very difficult. It's a very high price to pay, but I'm going to be able to sleep at night with a clear conscience.
And what do you say to those people that say, well, war isn't pretty. War is an ugly thing. And if somebody's a member of the military, they have signed up to serve their country.
Well, I would say that's absolutely true, but we need to look at this in proper context, that both of these are wars of choice. Both of these wars are in violation of international law and the U.S. Constitution and force soldiers to violate their own uniform code of military justice. And also, we look at wars, both of these situations, where U.S. soldiers are not being taken care of, neither by the government, neither by the military, neither by the Veterans Administration, and neither by most of the civilian population of the country, where this is not the average like conventional war where soldiers are going to go off and fight a conventional battle and then come back home as war heroes. These are illegal, immoral occupations where soldiers are doing home raids and they're doing things like torturing detainees and dehumanizing people and dehumanizing themselves, and they're put in this absolutely no-win situation, and then they become desperate and start doing things that I think normally in a regular war probably wouldn't happen. So I would say folks need to really look at the bigger picture at what's actually going on and kind of leave the rah-rah patriotism, support the troop stuff at home, and just really be honest about what is the government doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, and what is this really costing the military.
You've written about the suicide that has increased among these soldiers that come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from nightmares, saying that all they know how to do is kill people. Let's put it in perspective. Tell me what you have found out through your research.
This is very important context when we talk about GI resistance that's happening, and why I think it's a given that it's going to continue and spread as well. And it's when we look at what both these ongoing wars and occupations are doing to the military. I mean, we're looking at two major occupations, both of which really don't have an end in sight. And occupations are, by nature, very brutal, severe situations for a conventional military to find itself in, where they're basically put in positions where they're trying to act more as police than actually as soldiers. There was a RAND Corporation study, a military-connected think tank that came out in 2008 that showed at the time, the 1.8 million soldiers that had been cycled through Iraq and Afghanistan, that of those coming back, about 300,000 had severe depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition to that, we see a massive increase in the number of suicides in the military. In the Army alone, for example, in 2007, there was a record number of suicides since 1980, which is the first year they started keeping track of the number. In 2008, they set another record in the Army, and this year, as we speak, they're on track for setting yet another grim milestone of suicides. And then we're seeing more and more stories, just literally in the last 2 weeks, horrible stories of homicides on bases here in the U.S. and soldiers coming back and murdering their girlfriends or their wives and then killing themselves. I mean, this happened last week at Fort Bragg.
What is the U.S. government or Veterans Affairs doing to help these guys, to help treat them?
The short answer is not enough, obviously. We have a Veterans Administration that, as of a few weeks ago, passed over a kind of a grim mark where they had over 1 million claims from soldiers and veterans for help that were backlogged. When a soldier comes back, the average wait to get treatment at the VA right now, as far as statistics go, is 6 months. Instead of actually taking more effort to increase the VA and try to help more of these people coming back home, instead we've had a minimum of 43,000 troops sent back into combat who've already been diagnosed with severe PTSD or other types of debilitating situations. We see actually over 48,000 have been redeployed who already have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury from being nearby bombs when they go off. So we're looking that instead of more effort being put forth by the government or the Veterans Administration to try to help more soldiers, as we're well over the 2 million mark of people who've gone through in Iraq and Afghanistan. Instead of that, we're seeing, well, we're going to just try to keep this under wraps, keep these stories from getting out too far and too wide, and find other ways we can actually get these people and put them back in the system and recycle them back through the occupations again.